The moon hung high in the sky as the celebration was coming to a close. It was the wedding night of Alex and Lily, a couple who had known each other for years. They had been together through thick and thin, navigating the ups and downs of life with laughter and understanding. Their relationship had always been unique, built on a foundation of trust and a mutual respect for their individual freedoms. They had decided on an open marriage from the very start, agreeing to live with no secrets between them. But tonight was different. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter for them. They had spent the evening surrounded by friends and family, sharing vows and exchanging rings. As the party died down, Alex led Lily to their private suite in the hotel. He was excited. The day had been perfect, and he was eager to start their married life together. But what started as an evening of love and joy quickly turned into a nightmare. As soon as they were alone in the room, Alex began to act strange. He looked at Lily with a mixture of confusion and anger. The air grew tense, and Lily could feel something was wrong. "What's going on, Alex?" she asked, trying to remain calm. Alex turned away, pacing around the room. "I know, Lily. I know everything." Lily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" Alex's voice grew sharp. "I know about your past. I know what you were hiding from me. You think I didn't know? You think I wouldn't find out eventually?" Lily's eyes widened. She had spent years keeping her true identity a secret from Alex, afraid of how he would react. She had transitioned many years ago, but the idea of telling Alex had always been too scary. She didn't know how he would take it, and now it seemed that the truth had come crashing down on them both. "I never wanted to hide it from you," she said softly, trying to explain, "but I wasn't sure how you would react. I love you, Alex." Alex was silent for a moment, his back still turned. Then he slowly faced her, his eyes full of rage. "You lied to me. All these years you lied." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. She could see that Alex's anger wasn't just about the secret. There was something more, something deeper, gnawing at him. Before she could say another word, Alex lunged toward her. His hand grabbed her throat, squeezing with a force that took her breath away. Lily gasped, struggling to break free, but his grip only tightened. In a panic, she tried to push him away, but it was too late. Alex's anger had taken over, and within moments he had strangled her to the point where she couldn't breathe anymore. Her vision blurred and the room began to spin. Finally, everything went black. In the silence that followed, Alex stood over her lifeless body, his chest heaving with rage. The reality of what he had just done began to sink in, but it was too late. Lily was gone. As the hours passed, the wedding night that had been filled with promise ended in tragedy. Alex had committed a crime of passion, but he hadn't realized the consequences of his actions yet. What had started as a celebration of love would forever be marred by murder. The following morning, the hotel staff discovered Lily's body, and the police were called. The news of her death quickly spread, and soon a seasoned investigator named Detective Maria Jenkins was assigned to the case. Jenkins was known for her sharp instincts and ability to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. As Jenkins arrived at the scene, she looked around the room, taking in every detail. She knew this was not going to be a simple case. Detective Maria Jenkins walked into the hotel suite with a steady stride, her eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. She had been a detective for over 15 years, and there was nothing that escaped her keen sense of observation. The scene was as she expected, a mess of confusion, sadness, and incomplete answers. The staff had already cleared out, and the body had been taken to the morgue, but the room itself still held the traces of the horror that had unfolded here only hours earlier. The bride's body was found in the center of the room, her wedding dress sprawled around her like a ghostly veil. The room itself was well kept, pristine in some ways, but the atmosphere was heavy, laden with the weight of what had occurred. Jenkins took a deep breath, absorbing the energy of the place. The first thing she noticed was the absence of struggle. There were no signs of a violent altercation, no broken furniture or shattered glass. Everything appeared to be in place, but the absence of chaos spoke volumes. Detective Jenkins, a uniformed officer, greeted her with a somber tone. He was standing by the door, his face unreadable. The victim's name was Lily Turner. We're still piecing together the details. Her husband Alex is here. He's been detained for questioning. Jenkins nodded, already moving toward the small table where she could see a notepad and a few photographs of the crime scene. "What do we know about the victim?" she asked, flipping through the photographs quickly. She was 32 years old, married to Alex Turner, who's 35. They've been together for about 5 years. The wedding was last night. A quiet ceremony. No signs of any tension during the event, at least not in front of the guests. The officer paused, clearly uncomfortable. "But something happened here, Detective. It looks like Alex might be the one who did this." Jenkins studied the officer for a moment before speaking, her voice cool and measured. "I need to talk to him." The officer hesitated, then nodded, leading her to the small interrogation room where Alex was waiting. When they entered, Jenkins found him sitting alone, his hands resting on the table in front of him, fingers tapping nervously. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. The anger from last night had been replaced with something else. Regret, fear, or perhaps both. He looked up as Jenkins approached, his eyes darting toward her, and then quickly shifting away. "Mr. Turner," Jenkins began, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. "I'm Detective Maria Jenkins. I'm here to ask you about last night." Alex swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I didn't mean to," his voice cracked. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Jenkins studied him for a moment, noting the way his hands trembled. It wasn't the reaction she expected from a cold-blooded killer. The more she looked at him, the more she sensed confusion, not malice. "You didn't mean to?" Jenkins repeated, her tone neutral. "Mr. Turner, I need you to tell me exactly what happened last night." Alex closed his eyes for a moment, taking a shaky breath. "Lily and we had a good life together, you know? We always talked about everything, no secrets. Our marriage was open. I trusted her. But last night, I found out something that changed everything." Jenkins leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. "What did you find out, Mr. Turner?" Alex's voice dropped to a whisper. "I found out Lily wasn't who I thought she was. She wasn't born a woman. She was—" He stopped himself, swallowing again. "She was a man. She's transgender. She never told me. All these years, she hid it from me." Jenkins didn't react, but she mentally filed the information away. This was the motive Alex had been referring to. His sense of betrayal, his anger, the sense of being deceived. It seemed almost too simple, but Jenkins knew that things were rarely as straightforward as they seemed. "I didn't know what to think," Alex continued, his voice rising with emotion. "She told me last night, right before everything happened. I lost it. I never thought she was hiding something like that. I didn't know how to process it. It felt like a lie." Jenkins sat back, considering his words carefully. "So you attacked her? I didn't mean to." Alex's eyes welled up. I was angry. She kept this huge part of her life from me. I don't know how it happened, but I lost control. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late." Jenkins observed Alex's demeanor. He seemed genuinely remorseful, though his words still carried the weight of justification. He wasn't fully acknowledging the gravity of his actions yet, but she knew that might come later, after the shock wore off. His story, however, seemed plausible, but Jenkins had learned long ago that first accounts could be unreliable. "We'll need to confirm everything you've said, Mr. Turner," Jenkins said softly, "and we'll also need to know more about Lily." Detective Maria Jenkins sat at her desk, reviewing the statements she had gathered so far. Alex's confession, while emotionally charged, didn't provide the full picture. It was clear that Alex felt betrayed by Lily, but Jenkins suspected there was more to the story. Alex's reaction, while intense, didn't entirely explain why the situation had escalated to murder. She knew from experience that the initial confession often left out vital details. Her gut told her this wasn't just about deception and anger. There was a deeper layer yet to be uncovered. The first thing Jenkins decided to do was to examine Lily's life before she met Alex. She needed to understand who Lily was before becoming a part of Alex's world. What secrets did Lily carry? And how had she managed to keep such a significant part of her identity hidden for so long? Jenkins was certain the answers lay in Lily's past. Her first stop was to contact Lily's closest friends and family. A few calls later, Jenkins was in touch with Sarah, a woman who had been friends with Lily for years. Sarah sounded distraught when she picked up the phone, but her voice steadied when Jenkins introduced herself as the detective handling the case. "I can't believe she's gone," Sarah said, her voice thick with grief. "Lily she was everything to me. She was so strong, so beautiful. And I know she loved Alex, but I never knew about, what happened last night. I mean, she never told him." Jenkins listened carefully, sensing that Sarah could offer crucial insights. "Sarah, what do you mean by she never told him? What exactly are you referring to?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Sarah hesitated, clearly struggling with the words. "Lily never told Alex she was transgender, not because she didn't trust him, because she loved him so much. She was scared of how he would react." Jenkins' mind raced. This was the first time she was hearing about the depth of Lily's fear. It added a new layer to the situation. Lily had kept this secret not because she wanted to deceive, but because she felt vulnerable and exposed. Jenkins had assumed Lily's silence came from a place of shame, but now it seemed like something more protective, more fragile. "Did you know, Sarah?" Jenkins asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Did you know that Lily was transgender before Alex did?" Sarah let out a shaky breath. "Yes, I knew. She told me when we were in college. It wasn't easy for her, but she wanted to live as her true self. She struggled with it, especially in her romantic relationships. She dated a few people before Alex, but things never worked out. She was always afraid they wouldn't accept her. I think she felt like Alex was the one, though. She really believed he could accept all of her." Jenkins paused, processing this new information. "So Lily was in love with Alex and wanted to keep this part of herself hidden to protect their relationship?" "Exactly," Sarah replied. "She loved him so much, detective, and she was terrified that if she told him, he would leave her. It's why she never told him. She told me once that she thought she could hide it forever." Jenkins scribbled notes in her pad, trying to piece together the puzzle. This new revelation added depth to Alex's reaction. His anger may have been fueled not only by betrayal, but also by confusion. He had trusted Lily and believed he knew her inside and out. The truth, though, was a jagged pill to swallow, and it seemed he wasn't prepared to handle it. But was it enough to explain murder? Jenkins didn't think so. Something was still missing. After hanging up with Sarah, Jenkins turned to the next step in her investigation, reviewing Lily's background in more detail. She accessed Lily's social media profiles, carefully combing through posts, photos, and interactions. Lily had lived an outwardly happy life, but Jenkins noticed a subtle pattern of things left unsaid. There were hints in the photos, in the words Lily had written, that spoke to a deeper struggle, her need to maintain control over her narrative, to protect her truth. Jenkins was about to dive deeper into the social media trail when she received a call from her colleague, Officer Daniels. "Detective, we've got something interesting," Daniels said. "We managed to get our hands on Alex's phone records. There's something in his messages that caught our attention." Jenkins leaned forward, her attention sharp. "What do you have?" "We found a text message from Alex to his best friend Marcus. It was sent just hours before the murder. The message says, 'I'm going to confront her tonight. I need to know the truth.'" Jenkins's brow furrowed. The message was chilling. It suggested that Alex had been planning to confront Lily, but the tone was one of anticipation, not fear or anger. Alex had been building up to this moment for days, perhaps even weeks. He had been harboring his suspicions, and the truth had finally forced its way to the surface. Detective Maria Jenkins arrived at Dr. Kimberly Reynolds' office in a quiet part of the city. The building was modern, with large windows and clean, minimalist decor. As Jenkins approached the entrance, she couldn't help but think about the implications of Alex's contact with Dr. Reynolds. If Alex had been seeing a therapist, it could mean he had been grappling with deep emotional issues for some time. Whether those issues contributed to the tragic events of the wedding night was still unclear, but Jenkins felt strongly that uncovering the full extent of Alex's state of mind would be crucial. Dr. Reynolds' office was tucked at the end of a narrow hallway. Jenkins knocked twice before entering. Inside, she was greeted by a calm, professional woman in her late 40s, dressed in a simple blouse and slacks. The therapist's office was cozy, filled with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. Dr. Reynolds stood up as Jenkins entered, offering a firm handshake. "Detective Jenkins," Dr. Reynolds said, her voice soft but confident. "I've been expecting you." Jenkins didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Thank you for meeting with me, Doctor." Reynolds, "I need to ask you about Alex Turner. He's been in contact with you recently, and I believe you may have insight into his state of mind before his wife's death." Dr. Reynolds nodded, motioning for Jenkins to take a seat. "Of course, I understand. Alex has been one of my clients for several months now. It's important to note that everything discussed in therapy is confidential, but I can provide you with general information about his sessions." Jenkins sat down, her posture relaxed but her attention sharp. "I'm not asking for specifics about your conversations with Alex. What I need to know is what led him to seek therapy in the first place, and if anything in his behavior or conversations could explain what happened between him and his wife." Dr. Reynolds looked thoughtful for a moment, then sighed. "Alex came to me because he was struggling with relationship issues. He and Lily had a very open marriage, as I understand it, but he felt uncertain. He seemed conflicted about his feelings for her, especially as their wedding day approached. He told me he loved her, but there were deeper insecurities, and he often expressed feelings of inadequacy in the relationship." Jenkins leaned in slightly, intrigued. "Inadequacy in what way?" Dr. Reynolds paused, choosing her words carefully. "Alex was dealing with jealousy and self-doubt. He was concerned about Lily's past, her relationships with other people, her past as a transgender woman. He found it difficult to reconcile the idea of their open marriage with his own need for exclusivity. I remember he mentioned feeling threatened by the idea of Lily's former partners and the secrecy surrounding her past." "So, was Alex ever aware that Lily was transgender before their wedding?" Jenkins asked, already anticipating the answer. "No," Dr. Reynolds said, her tone softening. "Alex didn't know. Lily had kept that part of herself hidden, even from him, and it weighed heavily on Alex. He was starting to sense there were things Lily wasn't sharing with him. He wasn't sure what they were, but it created a lot of anxiety for him. There were many sessions where he spoke about feeling like he couldn't trust her completely, but he loved her, detective. He really did. He was just—" Dr. Reynolds searched for the right words. He was torn. Jenkins was processing this new information. "So did Alex ever say how he would react if he found out about Lily's secret? Was he expecting something like this to come out?" Dr. Reynolds hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Alex had been increasingly fixated on the idea of Lily's past. He was anxious about what would happen if he learned something that might shake his trust in her. He felt it was unfair that she had kept such an important part of her life hidden from him, but he also seemed to feel guilt about his own reactions. He didn't know how he would handle the truth." Jenkins absorbed this, her mind racing. It seemed Alex had been torn between love and doubt, and the pressure of the wedding had pushed him to confront what he had feared the most. "And did you ever talk to him about how to deal with these feelings?" Jenkins asked. "Yes," Dr. Reynolds replied. "We discussed strategies for improving communication and trust in his relationship with Lily. I encouraged him to be open and honest with her about his insecurities, but I also suggested he try to approach their issues with empathy and patience. I told him that relationships take work and that he needed to confront his fears head-on, not let them fester." Jenkins took a moment to reflect. It sounded like Alex had been on the edge of a breakthrough, but something had snapped instead. His anger, frustration, and insecurity had likely reached a boiling point the night of the wedding. Detective Maria Jenkins arrived at a modest townhouse tucked away in a quiet suburban neighborhood. She had spent the last few hours reviewing the text message Alex had sent to Marcus, his best friend, just before the murder. "I'm going to confront her tonight. I need to know the truth." The message had caught Jenkins' attention because it hinted at something more calculated, more deliberate than Alex had initially let on. It seemed to indicate that Alex wasn't merely reacting impulsively in a moment of anger, but had been preparing himself for a confrontation for some time. Jenkins rang the doorbell, her thoughts sharp. A few moments later, the door opened, revealing a man in his mid-30s with a slightly disheveled appearance. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days, and his posture was tense, as though he was bracing for something. When he saw Jenkins' badge, his expression shifted to one of resignation. "Detective Jenkins, I assume you're here to ask me about Alex?" Marcus said, his voice low, almost tired. "Come in." Jenkins stepped inside, glancing around the living room. The walls were lined with sports memorabilia and old photographs, evidence of a close friendship between Marcus and Alex. There was an unmistakable sense of familiarity, as if this space held years of shared memories. Marcus led Jenkins to the couch, where they both sat. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, Detective, I know why you're here. It's about the text, right? The one Alex sent me before the wedding night?" Jenkins nodded. "Yes. What exactly did Alex mean when he said he was going to confront Lily? Was he preparing for something specific? Did he know something about her?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding Jenkins's gaze. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Alex, he was freaking out, Detective. He wasn't the kind of guy to lose his temper, but that night I could tell something was off. He was tense for weeks leading up to the wedding, and the text, he sent it to me right before things went south, right before Lily was killed. He'd been talking about it for days, but not directly. It was like he was building up to something." Jenkins leaned forward, sensing that Marcus was holding back more. Building up to what? What had he been talking about? Did he say anything about what was going to happen when he confronted Lily? Marcus hesitated again, glancing down at his hands. I don't know, Detective. He didn't come out and say it, but he kept mentioning that Lily had been hiding something from him, something big. I think he felt betrayed by her, like she'd been lying to him. He said something about how he couldn't trust her anymore, that if she was hiding something so important, maybe everything else was a lie too. "Did Alex ever tell you what he thought Lily was hiding?" Jenkins asked, her voice probing but calm. Marcus swallowed hard and finally met her gaze. "Yeah, he did. A few days before the wedding, he told me he thought Lily might have had an affair. I mean, he was convinced that she'd been with someone else, and he was starting to doubt everything. He kept saying that she was probably hiding a part of her past, something he couldn't even begin to understand." Jenkins' mind raced as she processed this new information. Alex had been struggling with suspicion and insecurity, but Marcus's words made it clear that Alex's doubt had been focused on something specific. The idea that Lily had been hiding an affair seemed to have consumed him. But was it just an affair, or was it the revelation of her transgender identity that Alex had truly feared? "Marcus," Jenkins said, her tone softening, "did Alex ever mention anything about Lily's past? About her being transgender?" Marcus flinched slightly at the question, his eyes darting to the side. He seemed to wrestle with his thoughts for a moment before answering. "Yeah, he did. He wasn't sure, but he thought it could be true. He was starting to question everything, you know? All the things that didn't add up, like why Lily had kept her past so secret. He asked me if I thought she could be, well, not who she said she was. I told him I didn't know, that it didn't matter as long as they loved each other, but I think it ate at him." Jenkins felt a chill run down her spine. The pieces were coming together, slowly but surely. Alex's growing suspicions had morphed into something dangerous, something he couldn't control. The fact that Marcus had known about Alex's doubts and suspicions, without fully understanding the weight of those suspicions, was troubling. Alex had not only been confronting his fears about Lily's secrecy, but had also been grappling with his own insecurities about their relationship. This wasn't just about Lily's hidden past. It was about Alex's inability to reconcile his love for her with the lies he believed she had told. Detective Maria Jenkins arrived at the forensics office early the next morning, her mind still reeling from the revelations from Marcus. Alex's emotional turmoil, his growing suspicions, and the unresolved tension had all been building up to something tragic. But even with all the information from Marcus, Jenkins knew the key to understanding what had truly happened on the wedding night was hidden in the evidence. She needed to see the crime scene analysis herself. Only then would she have a clearer picture of the events that led to Lily's death. As Jenkins entered the forensics office, she was greeted by the lead investigator, Officer Rachel Simmons. Simmons was standing near a table covered with photos and evidence bags. The intensity in her eyes told Jenkins that she, too, was eager to get to the truth. Simmons handed her a folder filled with crime scene photos, and Jenkins began flipping through them, examining each image with careful attention. "The scene was gruesome," Simmons said, breaking the silence. "There was a significant amount of blood, but no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no signs that the victim fought back. It seems like the murder was quick, almost surgical. We found a knife near Lily's body, but it wasn't the only weapon. There was also a heavy lamp next to her head, covered in blood. Based on the positioning, it's clear she was attacked while sitting on the bed." Jenkins nodded slowly as she studied the photos. "Do we have the time of death?" Preliminary estimates suggest it occurred around midnight, though it could have been a little earlier or later. The hotel's security cameras show Alex leaving the room around 11:45 p.m. After that, there was a brief gap, and no footage captured the events that followed. "So Alex left the room before the murder occurred?" Jenkins asked, raising an eyebrow. Simmons nodded. "Yes, but the timeline is important. There was no sign of forced entry or anyone else entering the room after Alex left. The only explanation is that Lily was killed after he left, possibly by someone else, or Alex returned later and murdered her. But the lack of a struggle suggests it might have been a planned attack." Jenkins's mind raced. Alex had been a part of the confrontation, no doubt, but the details of the crime scene now suggested that Lily's death wasn't a momentary outburst of violence. There was precision in the way she had been attacked. The presence of the lamp, placed deliberately next to her head, raised questions. The knife, too, was positioned in a way that made it seem like the attacker knew exactly what they were doing. "Have we confirmed if the knife or the lamp are connected to Alex?" Jenkins asked. "We've run tests on both," Simmons replied. "The knife's fingerprints are a match for Alex's, but we found no prints on the lamp, which is odd. It's almost like the lamp was moved or placed there after the fact. No one touched it directly before the murder." Jenkins felt a chill run through her as the implications settled in. The knife, Alex's fingerprints. The lamp, possibly moved after the fact, maybe placed in a way to mislead or confuse. The details were unsettling, and the more Jenkins thought about it, the more the crime scene began to point toward Alex being directly involved in the murder. The question, however, was whether he had done it in a fit of rage or if something more premeditated was at play. "We found something else," Simmons continued. "In the closet, there was a bag of clothing that didn't belong to Lily. The label was torn, but it was clearly male clothing. Clothes that looked like they had been left there in a hurry." Jenkins' eyes narrowed. "Male clothing? Do we have a name?" Simmons shook her head. "We don't know who it belongs to yet, but it's definitely worth looking into. It's possible that someone else was involved in the incident." Jenkins stood still for a moment, absorbing the new information. Alex's involvement seemed certain with the knife, but the presence of male clothing in the room suggested there might be more to the story. Had Alex planned the murder with someone else? Or had another individual entered the room afterward, possibly even helping Alex cover up the crime? There were too many unanswered questions, and Jenkins was determined to find the truth. "I want to run a background check on the clothing," Jenkins said, her voice firm. "See if we can trace it to anyone. And I want the full forensic analysis on the knife. Make sure we didn't miss anything." Simmons nodded. "We'll get on it." Before Jenkins left the office, she stopped at the evidence board, where a timeline of events was mapped out. Her eyes scanned it, her mind working through each moment. Alex's confession about confronting Lily, the hotel security footage of him leaving the room, and the fact that no one had entered afterward. All of it painted a picture of a confrontation gone horribly wrong. Detective Maria Jenkins sat in her car, the engine idling as she stared at the address in front of her. Julian Carter's house. The information about Carter had quickly escalated the case, and Jenkins knew this was the final piece of the puzzle. If Julian had been involved in Lily's death, his motives, his actions, and his relationship with Alex needed to be uncovered before she could move forward. Jenkins had already spoken to Officer Daniels about Carter's background. Julian Carter had been a significant part of Alex's life years ago, but something had caused a rift between them. The details of their falling out were murky, but what mattered now was that Carter's clothing had been found in the hotel room, a piece of evidence that suggested he had been there on the night of the murder. After taking a deep breath, Jenkins stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door of a two-story house. The house seemed ordinary, suburban, with no sign of distress or unusual activity. Jenkins rang the doorbell, waiting for the inevitable confrontation that was about to unfold. A moment later, the door opened, and a man in his early 30s appeared. He was tall, with a lean build and short-cropped hair. His face was hardened, but there was an underlying unease in his eyes when he saw Jenkins's badge. "Detective Jenkins," he said, trying to mask his surprise with an attempt at a smile. "What can I help you with?" "I need to ask you about your involvement with Alex Turner," Jenkins said, her tone firm but controlled. "We know you were in contact with him before the murder, and we found your clothing in the hotel room where his wife Lily was killed. I need to know what you were doing there that night." Carter's face shifted, his eyes narrowing as he processed the words. For a moment, it seemed like he might deny everything, but instead he sighed and stepped aside to let Jenkins enter. "Come in," Carter said, his voice quieter now. "I'm not going to run, but I need to make something clear before you start interrogating me." Jenkins entered the house, observing the minimalist interior. It was a stark contrast to the emotional chaos she had uncovered in Alex's life. Carter led her into a living room with a few pieces of modern furniture and a coffee table. There were no signs of struggle or disturbance here, just the calmness of someone who hadn't anticipated being in the middle of a murder investigation. Once they were seated, Jenkins wasted no time. "What was your relationship with Alex? And why was your clothing in Lily's room that night?" Carter leaned back in his chair, his hands folding in front of him. "Alex and I were friends in college, but after graduation, things got complicated. We had different paths. I got into real estate, he stayed in tech. We lost touch for a few years, but recently Alex reached out to me. He was struggling with something personal. He wanted to talk, and I agreed. We met a few times, but I had no idea things would end up like this." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "What exactly was Alex struggling with?" Carter's gaze drifted, as if recalling something difficult. He was having issues with his wife, Lily. He didn't know how to deal with her past. The thing about her being transgender, it was eating him up. He didn't trust her anymore. I think he was looking for someone to talk to about it, but he couldn't open up to anyone else. Jenkins leaned forward slightly. "And did you give him advice on how to handle it?" Carter hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I tried. I told him to confront her, to be honest about his feelings, but I didn't think it would come to this. I didn't know it would spiral out of control." Jenkins felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "And your clothing in Lily's room, how do you explain that?" Carter's expression darkened. He clenched his jaw and then spoke, his voice tinged with regret. "I went to the hotel that night. Alex was in a bad place, and I thought maybe I could help him. But when I arrived, things were worse than I expected. Alex was already there, and he was angry. He had confronted Lily about her past, about being transgender. I think it broke him. He didn't know how to handle it. I tried to talk to him, tried to calm him down, but he didn't want to listen. It was clear that the marriage was falling apart right then and there." Jenkins's mind whirled. If Carter had been there, then his story added a crucial layer to the case. He wasn't just a passive observer. He had been involved in the moments leading up to the confrontation. "So, you were there when Alex confronted Lily?" Carter nodded slowly. "Yes, I was there when it happened. Alex and Lily were arguing. I told him to step away, to give her space. But then it happened so quickly. I don't know exactly what went down in that room, but when I walked in, Lily was already dead. Alex was standing over her, holding a knife. I didn't know what to do. I panicked.